And with the title Lone Gladio, it sounds like, a reference to the Operation Gladio or Gladio B. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Well, again, it's hard to summarize this because sometimes I'm afraid some oversimplifying things can leave it up to so many different kinds of interpretation.
Sure.
But Operation Gladio is not some kind of a conspiracy term or something that people come up with saying, I believe there was such an operation. Operation Gladio, people can go and do a Google search, and they can find it even from the CIA's own division.
Right,
FOIA documents that in late 1950s, after World War II, after CIA was established, after NATO was established, NATO, together with the CIA, they created this paramilitary units, covert paramilitary units around the world, mainly in Europe, some in the Middle East, to basically counter the Soviet Union and the spread of communism as an ideology. So the role of these paramilitary units, funded, directed, managed, armed by the CIA and NATO, was during these years in Europe and elsewhere, were to create terror events. Blow up bombs, gun down people, set, let's say, a shopping center on fire, and then blame it on the communist networks. And they did hundreds of such operations. There are several good books from historians who have documented these false flag terror events, events that were created, implemented, brought about by the CIA, NATO's paramilitary units within Eastern Europe, in Italy. And in Italy, they were very big, but the biggest nation that they had the biggest unit, which had its own also office inside the Pentagon, was in Turkey, and that's where I'm from, the Turkish arm of the Gladio network. So they did all this, and you think that once the Soviet Union dissolved in 1990, 1991, the operation would have been basically shut down because this was against communism, so-called. That's the basically the competition between the two superpowers, not per se the communism as ideology. It was the fight for the dominance, global dominance. But they didn't shut it down. They switched that and they changed the operation from the original operation to Operation B, Gladio Operation B. This time, starting in 1995, 1996, and these are again paramilitary CIA, NATO, joint CIA, NATO units in Central Asia, in Caucasus, in Middle East, and in North Africa, utilizing these units, paramilitary units, under fanatic Islam labels and titles and terror organization names, and have them basically create terror events, again, in that part of the world. For example, they have, and this is Gladio Operation B, they have a Chechen network, Chechens, and they have had these units trained inside Turkey, and this is mid-1990s, and it still continues to date. And they arm them, and they set up operational guidelines with targets to, let's say, blow up a school or a movie theater is somewhere in Russia, whether it's in Moscow or in St. Petersburg or elsewhere, or let's say somewhere in Georgia or in Azerbaijan. Same thing with what you see, let's say, in other parts of the Middle East. So that Operation Gladio turned into a different operation, the same modus operandi of creating false flag events, synthetically created terror units as Islamic fanatic units that would create these terror events, thus the chaos associated with it, thus the justification for NATO, CIA, U.S. military intervention in Middle East today, but with the goal of having more of these events taking us further into the previously Russian territories. And if you look at the ultimate nations that we will be seeing more and more, we have been seeing it with Middle East, but we will be seeing more and more, it would be in places such as Georgia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, and basically closing further and further towards Russia. Because when they do create these events as consequences, it provides the pretext, the justification to interfere and go inside those nations. For example, Azerbaijan is now becoming a NATO member. We have a large base in Azerbaijan. And anybody who would go and look at the map, you see how close it is, to Russia. Or when you're looking at places like Georgia, for example, and Georgia is another candidate for NATO base to become a NATO member. So that is pretty much in a nutshell of what Operation Gladio is, and the fiction deals with that. And when I talked about my work with the FBI with this particular special unit under counterintelligence, when I said the files dated back to 1997, well, these files specifically dealt with Operation Gladio B with both Turkish individuals and networks and organizations as actors, target actors, but also with really brand names, U.S. agencies and U.S. individuals, prominent names within the State Department, U.S. State Department in late 1990s and early 2000s, and the CIA, and also within Pentagon.
So when you say synthetically created, terrorist cells or groups, are these people they're being funded by these, as you say, brand name groups or State Department type of groups, and then are they manipulated? How does that work?
Well, I can give you a recent example. In fact, my website, boilingfrogspost.com, or short bfbreport.com, in 2011, months and months before Syria became headline, anything about Syria was ever, written on the New York Times and Washington Post and CNN, we broke a story. I broke a story based on my sources here in the United States military, but also in Turkey, about the fact that special CIA NATO forces in a NATO base in Turkey, which is in southern portion of Turkey, very close to Syrian border, they were bringing in Turkey, the CIA NATO Gladio units, they were recruiting and bringing in people from northern Syria into these camps, part of the U.S. Air Force Base in southern Turkey, and they were training them, military training, they were arming them, and they were basically directing them towards creating terror events inside Syria, not only against Assad, but also in various villages and regions against the people, against public. And when we broke the story and we cited all this, nobody from the mainstream media even looked at. In fact, several of my sources had, before approaching me at Boiling Frogs Post, they had gone with evidence, documents, with aerial pictures to some of the top publications, such as New York Times, but they did not print any of this, not because of lack of supporting documents, because at that point they were not ready in the United States to make Syria the real case. They were still in the midst of training and taking these people, then funneling them back into Syria. These are really porous borders between Syria and Turkey. And then 7-8 months later, suddenly Syria started entering the news headlines in the United States. Well, that was the training and the beginning of the ISIS brand. You know, it started as ISIL, ISIL, and then it turned to ISIS, now short is IS. But this was completely by design. It was created, and the people who are part of the so-called ISIS, they were carefully selected, brought into the U.S. base, in U.S. NATO base in Turkey. They were trained, they were funneled, and this is what they were told to do. They created a new brand, and a new brand with the purpose of replacing the old brand, Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, after 12 years, started losing its oomph as a brand. You know, this is no different than any kind of marketing strategy. You would see some companies bringing in the same kind of product but under a different brand and packaging to excite the buyers, purchasers, the consumers. Well, this is exactly the same thing with Al-Qaeda weakening as a brand, because after a while people just get like, oh yeah, it's the same thing. Al-Qaeda here, Al-Qaeda there. Mm-hmm. They are inside the wells. They are inside in the backyard in my outhouse. So they said this is the time to create another brand, and so they gave birth to this ISIS brand. And within 2 years, this brand that never existed before, and if you go and look at the headlines, you can Google ISIS and financial network. This ISIS brand became the richest terror organization on the planet with $2+ billion net worth. I mean, think about it. How does that happen? How can in 2 years some ferocious terrorist group gets to be formed, and they have all these guns and all these bombs, and they have Range Rovers, and they have Jeeps, and they have all these sophisticated training, military and paramilitary training. They have $2 billion plus. They have IT network, and they are the world's the scariest terror organization, and that's the hallmark of Operation Gladio B. That's what they have been doing since 1950s, and now with people getting very, I guess, apt to, likely to buy these types of brands, subscribe to these kinds of brands, they're being marketed to the consumers in the West, which they are gobbling it up with the mainstream media about this ISIS. They even have uniform-like looks with the special bandanas. They look like Ninja Turtles. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did not get some help from the Hollywood production consultings they have on their payrolls, and some really brilliant marketing experts to rebrand Al-Qaeda, come up with a brand new brand, replace the old brand, and in less than 2-3 years make it the largest, the richest, the most ferocious, the most capable. As they did with Al-Qaeda today, they are putting out this headline saying ISIS has access and capability in biological weapons. People can go and Google this. ISIS has capability and ability to engage in chemical weapons, utilize chemical weapons and attack. Now they are saying that they possibly have nuclear capabilities. I mean, even if you look at the unbelievable organizations that fairly quickly became big, you would never see such marketing scheme that in 2-3 years you can become that rich, $2 billion plus net worth. Well, these all go into the years and years, decades and decades, half a century experience of creating these synthetically created terror brands, give them the oomph to market it to the consumers here in the West.
Yeah, you really hear a lot of that ISIS is like Al-Qaeda, but worse, and there's videos pumped out constantly. The social media is working, is constantly being shown as a part of their group. So it's really like in the technological age,